So, good morning. Today we will be speaking about civil society and the problems for civil society of surviving this rather complex period. And I would like to start with a colleague of mine, a friend, professor of psychology, specialist in psychotrauma from Ilia State University, Georgia, Tbilisi. And I'm very happy that she is here. And one thing that I think is very important to keep in mind, she is a part of a university that the Georgian government is basically closing down. They are restructuring the whole university system with the direct goal of getting the academic circles under their control. And Ilia State University has lost 92% of their teaching programs. And that, of course, affects very much the work that Jana is doing. So it's a double happiness that you are here with us, Jana. The place is yours. Come on.
Thank you very much, Robert, for introduction. And good morning, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you. I have to confess that that's my favorite conference. Yeah. Oops. So, the title of my presentation is The Missing Element. So, I am going to speak, in my view, what I am thinking that it's missing in developmental aid and political support work, which was generously provided to the civil society and not only to our countries in transition, post-communist countries. So I am going to speak about so-called software factors, that's psychological factors. And step by step, I will uncover this topic. And I am also going to speak about how political leaders, yesterday was often used the term malignant narcissist leaders. I am actually using today the term malignant populists are actually manipulating with psychological factors that are influencing large group psychodynamics. And of course, I will end my presentation with reflection on what we are doing right now and what is possible to do. And that's on the left side of my presentation, that's my favorite Ukrainian artist, Evgenia Gobchinska's Mona Lisa. So I consider it's my alter ego. I love this picture. And I am starting with a quote from my mentor. So yesterday, our ladies were speaking about beloved, special people. And Vamik Volkan is one of those. In 2020, I saw him for the last time. He's now in his 1930s age, and he cannot travel. But in 2020, he presented at our conference in Kaunas, I guess, yeah? So Vamik says that in societies that are treated inhumanly due to political systems, such as totalitarian regimes in former communist countries, even when political and legal systems change and traumatizing elements within the society are removed, individuals and societal responses to the previously existing and devastating political system do not disappear overnight. Depending on the severity and of the traumatizing events and how long they lasted, the influence of the shared trauma of the victimized group and their descendants may continue for decades. So why I started with Volkan's quote, because I would like to show in the right column of my slide that a lot was generously provided by the humanitarian aid and developmental work and political support, starting from promoting rule of law in our country. I will speak mainly about Georgia. I will briefly touch upon Russia. So, and anti-corruption measures, democratic education, inclusion of youth and marginalized groups, and supporting their inclusion into socio-political life. Economic opportunities were provided and are still. Monitoring of elections, and even confronting authoritarian turns in our governance. And of course, I put in red civil society empowerment, because that was always and is always considered as the key, actually, for developing democracy in the country. Civil society organizations are and were the main, actually, recipients of support. And in Georgia, it worked very well. Till now, we had very strong civil society organizations. For example, in 2004, when the corrupted government of Shevardnadze was replaced by the new government, who very effectively, efficiently fought corruption at the beginning of their term, and started nation building and transformation into a successful pro-Western state based on our constitution. Actually, the government was formed by the civil society leaders, actually. And civil society was the locomotive for the changing government, who slided towards authoritarianism back in 2012. But in spite of this huge support, something was always missing, both externally, speaking about external support and help, and also internally, not enough efforts were put. And I will explain in what. So what was the missing element which actually allowed us to transition from young democracy, as we were till, let's say, 2023, to young autocracy? I would say that's underestimation of so-called software factors, psychological factors that influence societal life. So I'm going to speak about neglected collective trauma, and the code which I brought at the beginning, Vamik-Volkan's code, it's exactly about this. So we need to think, and we need to think about and to address societal trauma if we would like to build democratic state. I would like to say that, of course, 20 minutes is not enough to cover all the psychological topics which are associated with this theme, but I would like to say that mourning, authentic mourning, has crucial importance in actually overcoming large-scale collective trauma. And what is authentic mourning about? That's not about collective crying or funeral, not at all. That's about multi-track, multi-dimensional work on healing the society. And that's process of justice, starting from actually moral, material, procedural satisfaction of the repressed. That's about rehabilitation, restitution, lustration, restorative justice measures, so on and so forth. Science to explore what happened and how it happened. Art to symbolize, to help the society to express emotions and to put meaning into painful experience. Memory policies are very important. Services, psychosocial, mental health, among others. But what happens if authentic mourning is not possible? Then non-authentic patterns of mourning take place. And large group psychoanalysts actually distinguished so-called sentimental mourning, when society is trapped in victimhood and considering and feeling themselves as victims. Or revengeful mourning, very much tied to sentimental mourning, when a large group tries to actually and thinks of revenge, or even don't think but acts in this direction. And so-called victorious or triumphant mourning. So I am going to bring brief examples of each type of mourning. For example, here this Here, this photo is very interesting in this regard. It's an illustration of sentimental mourning. That's in Tskhin Valley, a Russia-occupied town of Georgia, where actually in one of the schools, public schools yards, is a cemetery of people who were killed during the war, during the armed conflict, and this is a statue of crying father. Man crying is not acceptable in the Ossetian culture. So if man cries, he is hugely humiliated. And can you imagine, every morning children are going to the school and going through the cemetery and passing by humiliated father. So that's kind of sculpture that is erected to symbolize sentimental mourning, which could easily switch to revengeful one. Let's go further. I would like to say that unprocessed collective trauma reveals itself as annihilation anxiety in society. So nowadays we are on individual level. If mourning is not processed properly, if person is not able to mourn out their grief, we are having already diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder. What happens on a collective level? So annihilation anxiety takes place, which means that society lives in the mode of survival and development is stuck. So let me bring example of Georgia. 10% of our adult population were repressed during Soviet period. Another 10% actually were killed in World War II. So Russian Empire sent to the war 20% of country's population. We are just 3.5 million plus minus all these years. So authentic mourning did not take place at all because there was no de-Stalinization in our society, and that's exactly what was not paid attention to. No lustration, no rehabilitation, proper rehabilitation of the repressed, no acknowledgement that that's happened with them, no memorization policies, memorizing victims, no scientific explorations, no justice. When authentic mourning fails, annihilation anxiety starts, and it's very easy to be manipulated by unhealthy political leaders, let's say, by malignant populists. Malignant political leadership leads to the narcissistic regress of the population. So yesterday we spoke a lot about pathology of leaders, or assumed pathology of leaders, let's say, yeah, not to violate Goldwater rule. But we did not say that perhaps the most devastating consequences is exactly the narcissistic regress of the society that they trigger. And now I'm going quickly back to my slide of developmental and political support, and I am going to articulate what is the missing element, or what is the wrong assumption here. So we are based on an assumption of rationality of the processes. This is why we assume that if we will develop civil society, if we will actually fight corruption, if we will actually promote rule of law, etc., everything will be all right. But the processes are much more irrational, and we don't face this. So we are based on the assumption of rationality, and we do not pay attention to the processes which are actually very irrational. So what is narcissistic regress of the large group about? Division on us and them, us goodies and them baddies or evil, and mass projections of your own unacceptable characteristics onto your political opponent or any type of opponent, and mass introjections of just switching off critical thinking and swallowing propaganda. And the followers are rallying around the leader, and minor differences are becoming major issues. So this is about narcissistic regress. which is not rational at all. The processes are irrational. And we, actually, civil society leaders, political leaders, or members, or Western developmental aid representatives or political support promoters, we don't pay enough attention to this irrationality, while populistic leaders are addressing exactly this irrationality with their messages, hybrid war messages, let's say, and while actually okay, I will speak about it a bit later, but I would like just to illustrate authentic mourning example and failed mourning. So we know that both sides, Germany and Russia, lost millions of populations. It's estimated at German side death toll of from 5 to 8 millions. At Russian Empire side, it was 25 to 30 millions estimation. Yeah. And here is a marvelous project, Stumbling Stones by Günther Demnig. So he started with putting names and short, actually, information about Jewish people, Jewish families who were victimized by Holocaust, and fixing them in the living surrounding, not far away, not in the closed museum, just in our living environment. And at the beginning, he was doing it on his own risk, let's say, without permission, and it was a not easy process to promote this project. And in 2004, he was rewarded by the state for this project. So, in contrast, what is going on in Russia? Triumphant mourning of the losses. So they are celebrating, and they are celebrating victory. That's typical victorious mourning. So non-authentic mourning, which does not help to deal with the trauma. And here you see 2015, 9th of May, so Victory Day in Russia, demonstration, and just ordinary mother and child. Another, actually, slide, which I would like to show you about celebration. In 2008, Russians built Russian military church dedicated to the victory in the Second World War. And that's the main icon there, Mother of Christ icon. And now I would like to show you how surprisingly it resembles Rodina Mать Zовет Soviet poster, the Stalin's period poster that was motivating people to fight. And you can see here the military oath in hands of the mother, and here actually some religious text in hands of the child. So if you are interested in more details, I have a paper on this type of psychodynamics, non-healthy psychodynamics of the large group, and you can read more. But what I would like to say is that war and attack in Ukraine was predictable already in 2015, 2018. And yesterday, actually, that was a conversation here that nobody expected. But if psychology is taken enough, seriously enough, it was predictable. So, and that's another demonstration of utilizing annihilation anxiety by Putin via saying that Soviet state was deconstructed, and that's the main, actually, largest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, saying to his population that we are under threat of being annihilated, and we very well know his famous actually quote on February 24 of 2022. NATO is steadily expanding, the military machine is moving and approaching our borders to annihilate us, yeah? That's an assumption. So, and that they have no other choice than attacking Ukrainians, on whom the enemy image of Nazi Germany was projected. That's why the myth of denazification of Ukraine is so emotional, because old unprocessed trauma of Second World War was directly projected onto Ukrainian population. So, in Georgia, so if you will just make kind of overview of the Russian hybrid war messages, you will see how targeted the information war attack is, how actually precisely using annihilation anxiety related to unprocessed societal trauma. For example, the West is trying to take away our Georgianness. That's one of the actually hybrid war messages, widespread in the population, and nobody knows what this Georgianness is. But it's a very emotional message, which works. The West wants to involve us in the war. Well, if Russia is an occupant, then Turkey is an occupant as well. That's also about annihilation anxiety. Well, in medieval centuries, we had some fights with Turkey, yeah. Yeah. So Europe wants to turn our men to breastfeeding mothers. So this is another very emotional and irrational message. And of course, that's strange, but it's believed by the population because we were missing this element of taking into consideration irrationality of the unprocessed collective trauma, and we were not actually doing enough to actually address it. And here we are having actually, I use this image. But in fact, that's Georgian pre-election campaign of the current government. The main motto was, "Do you want war?" Yeah, so the same pathos as this American guy had many years ago, yeah? So, another actually unhealthy developments in Georgia attempts to exterminate civil society. So it started in 2015 by articulating by some opinion leaders, pro-governmental opinion leaders, that if we are speaking of KGB agents, let's speak about Western agents as well. Immediately, we were aware, those of us who were monitoring the situation in Russia, that's about Russian legislation of foreign agents. But what I would like to say, nobody was alarmed at the nobody. So in 2023, the legislation was introduced for the first time. They failed. In 2024, it was introduced, adopted by the parliament, and reinforced. And then a series of legislative changes followed, which made almost impossible to work for civil society organizations. And this is also actually campaign accompanying these legislative changes that civil society leaders and some politicians and that was in the streets at this period. So that's spies. That's spies who are actually who don't respect our church, etc., etc. So that was also motivating electorate to vote for against these people and to vote for the legislative changes. So, and now, what is going on now? Actually, we are sliding from young democracy to not only young autocracy, but to young totalitarianism, because the problem-solving approach in the country is fully cancelled. And what do we have? Let's speak about health sector, our sector, yeah? For example, promoting of anti-abortion legislation is considered as the means to improve demographic situation in the country. Can you imagine? While poverty is the main reason why people don't want to have children. Drug addiction field, compulsory treatment is considered as the means to improve drug situation in the country. Mental health field, the reform is reverting. Community-based care is almost actually destroyed because civil society organizations were providers of community-based care. And now the psychiatric beds amount is dramatically increasing. And the register, universal register, to actually have all the patients and also people with any possible mental health problem in the database of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. That's our reality today. And Science of Political Abuse of Psychiatry started last year. So no attention is paid to the individual environmental and socio-economic determinants of health, of course. If you don't want to solve problem, of course you do not do it. So what do we do? That's the last slide, I think, of my presentation. So that's demonstrations, and you see here Georgian flag, European Union flag, and Ukrainian flag. That's how it is usually. Yes, that's demonstrations against actually colonization, recolonization, which is going on in the country. And we need to call things their names, yeah? That's police forces, that's protesters beaten up cruelly, and that's what we are doing. We keep going. So I would like to say that I don't have ready-to-use recipes and ready-to-use answers, because we are not in post-trauma situation nowadays. We are in the situation of ongoing, continuous traumatization. And here we cannot predict and plan. The main complaint, actually, in my studies, which I do with the protesters, is that we cannot plan anymore anything. Well, we cannot plan, but we keep going. That's the recipe for the continuous traumatic stress situation, because we are very resilient. Actually, Robert, I was frustrated. I wanted to present a resilience session. Yeah, because actually, at the end of my presentation, how do you think people, what is the most widespread or most common human response to the stress and potentially traumatizing stressors? Just speak loudly, just say. Drink, collapse, the third something. Sorry? Sleeping. Okay, that's resilience. Resilient trajectories is the most common trajectories, and we need to know. I spoke about pathology and trauma, but it does not mean that I am pathologizing what is going on in the society. We need to keep in mind this irrationality and address it, and it will work, I am sure. So, thank you so much. That's another my favorite artist from Georgia, Levan Jogoshvili. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. That was brilliant. Exactly what we hoped for. So we go to the panel discussion. The moderator is Janet Anderson, Janet 1. Then speakers, Jonathan Cohen, Luca Jorat, Berit Lindemann, and Michael Hall. Can you please come forward?
So yes, thank you. There we go. I have asked my 4 panelists to do some descriptive work from different geographical areas. They will, of course, skip around, not only describing what is going wrong, but also talking about what some of the measures are with the civil society groups that they have worked with, what differences they are managing to make. So. And then, of course, we'll open up to the audience and ask you to provide us with some direction with your questions. Let us start with Berit Lindemann. She is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and she has such a wide range of experience that I thought that I'd kind of describe this as an overview. Berit.
Thank you very much. First of all, I really appreciated the previous introduction. I really share those views. I think the lacking, reconciliance with the past of a region where so much horrifying things have happened is a very important factor of what makes it possible to decline so quickly back into authoritarianism in many states. So thank you for that. I want to just go a very quick recap back to yesterday. The context, because it's very important for what happens in civil society today. So we have a decline, a very sharp one in many places, in democracy indexes. And the percentage of liberal democracies in the world now is down to 7%, which is and most of them are in Western Europe. International law and institutions are seriously weakened. Institutions are often just played completely checkmate by countries that don't want them to work. Vast impunity. I'm not talking about only legal impunity, the lack of legal consequences for perpetrators, but also that there is a lacking reaction when backsliding is happening, very lackluster reactions from those countries that should have, and those institutions that should have reacted. There is less appetite and priority on support to human rights and democracy agenda, and that is a lot of that is based on the populist agenda. Civicus, which is an organization that works a lot on support to civil society and analysis, they have a term I like, access of unaccountable powers, are increasing and increasing also in its power. They gain terrain and spread influence, and of course we have Russia, China, but when they're now matched by the US, the consequences are really devastating. Big tech influence, it was touched upon actually mostly by a question from the audience, but I think it is massively underrated. And I will try to come back to that a little bit afterwards. And diplomacy lose terrain, and also touched upon yesterday. So all of this happens on the shoulders of a period with a relatively successful development of civil society, a lot of activism happening through the 90s, early up to 2010, where the reaction is coming. At the time, I was working a lot in Azerbaijan and South Caucasus, for instance, in Belarus, and I think the backlash, and also Russia, backlash came as a result of that relative success. I think that is important to understand. Powers started to fear civil society. We had the Georgia uprising, Ukraine uprising, we saw in Kyrgyzstan. They became too powerful to accept. Now, so the global challenges, again, for CSOs, overall, I think one thing to highlight, which is a bit boring, it's the steep decline in financing. USAID, we don't talk anymore about, it's a year since USAID was completely dismantled, and the US support, which had been so important, simply just vanished overnight. The consequences have been devastating globally, but also in Europe. Surprisingly, a lot of this support to civil society in Europe came from the US. But at the same time, this financing declined in Europe. Almost all donors to civil society has reduced the last year. So can't be underestimated. Access to decision-making processes. I mean, yes, we have in many countries a strong civil society, but me, for instance, I think it is, although we are becoming more and more professional, we are still sort of just a sidekick to the real decision-making process. We didn't need to hear the point of view of civil society, so that is sort of, but we're never really at the table. I think that it's time to give us a real place at the table. There's a lot of rituals, the hearings. In Norway we have a lot of hearings, but very often we don't see the results in the policy actually being proposed afterwards. And in some countries, of course, increasingly totally excluded, no access whatsoever. In international organizations, institutions, yes, but they're not really listened to. And there is, I sense an NGO fatigue in international organizations, a bit because we are more successful in the sense of we are more professional, we have better arguments, we are better documented, then it's so annoying to listen to us. And they just keep, here, I mean, I won't say who it was someone very, very high ranking in the Council of Europe. So I'm so tired about hearing about Azerbaijan and Georgia, you know. International organizations are undesirables. We have a lot of competition from disinformation. In authoritarian regimes, legislation has been mentioned, LGBT propaganda laws, foreign agent laws, under extremism, terrorism laws. In Russia and Belarus, we have up to 4,000 imprisoned political prisoners for their activism. Exiled Russians have 500 to 1 million exiled citizens, and up to 15,000 of them are activists or journalists or lawyers or some kind of active people. And they're completely silenced inside. There's no dialogue with authorities. And there is a problem with inside, outside. We can come back to that if you want to. And then I want to mention transnational repression, because the repression continues from the repressive regimes inside into the countries where they're supposed to be safe, and they're not safe anymore. So they are under pressure from to harm to relatives, they're pressure to espionage. There have been even in Norway cases about that. They don't get documentation. They don't get renewal of documents, which essentially make a lot of people in Europe now essentially de facto stateless persons. Also, it can be explained. And then I have a file on big tech, but you can ask me about that afterwards, because there will be other.
Okay, great. Thank you, Berit. I mean, so many different issues potentially to pick up, I think, out of that. But let's hear from the rest of the panel first. I'm going to turn to Lukáš Zorad, who's the Director of Partners for Democratic Change in Slovakia, who has been active in many different civil society movements. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for having me here. I'm new to this conference, so for me everything is new, but it's such a pleasure to be here. I think I'm going to give you a little overview, because the term of this panel is clamping down on civil society. So I'm going to speak a little bit about how it's happening in Slovakia. But first, disclaimer: nothing compared to Georgia. Nothing compared to Belarus, nothing compared to other countries that are outside of the European Union, because we really cannot compare those scenarios. I think in the European Union, we still do have lots of functional institutions, even though the governments are trying really hard to diminish them and make them weaker. But they do help, and we have lots of checks and balances that are still keeping us alive. And I would say we do the same things as the people in Georgia, but we are more successful thanks to this, thanks to being in the EU. So this is really crucial and important to say. So I really just trying to bring the Central European context. I've been involved a lot, not only within Slovakia, but we do work very closely with the Hungarian civil society, with Polish civil society, Czech civil society. And the thing is, like in Slovakia especially, we do have a government that doesn't like us for some reason. We didn't do anything wrong, but they just don't like us. And I think that's the first sign that, that they have these sort of like authoritarian tendencies. The worst impact is reputational, because they have lots of power in media, and they speak about us in a very nasty way. And they're really trying to portray us as a political NGOs, those who are trying to influence the life in the country. I mean, we are trying to influence the life in the country, because, that's what we do, to the better, of course. But they're trying to really separate to those who are helping, helping the weak and other people, and those who are political, those nasty. So they were trying to even define it in a law, but impossible, mission impossible. They always fail, always, luckily. So they were not doing very well with that. So then they tried a couple of laws. First they tried with the foreign agent law, the obvious one. They did the copy-paste thing from the Georgian, Russian, Hungarian thing. It failed in Hungary. It was overturned by the Constitutional Court. In Slovakia, it didn't even make it to the parliamentary discussion. Because it was so bad, it was just a copy-paste. It did not gel with any legislation that we have in place, and it was so bad that even they themselves had to reject it before it made it to the parliament, which was really nice. So that was the first victory we had. So then they tried a lobbying law, which was highly discriminatory because it was only, the lobbyists were supposed to be only us, the civil society, right? Not the companies at all, just civil society. And it was so badly written that it didn't make it to the parliament again. And I think we are very lucky that our government is really not very smart. I'm sorry, if anyone is sitting here and sending notes, say hi, and they can consult us to make it better, because really, it's our luck. Now, there was one that they succeeded on, the third attempt to clamp down on civil society. With an information law. They made us an obligatory person under the information law, where we had to report all kinds of stuff. So that created a tremendous administrative burden on the civil society. This law has passed. It's been active for 6 months. We have spent lots of energy to learn how to navigate the law. We have spent lots of energy how to do things right and properly despite the stupid law. After 6 months, it was overturned by the Constitutional Court. Thank you very much. We told them so, but they wouldn't listen to us, right? So that was the third one that they succeeded, but only for 6 months. Now they are trying to prepare the other laws and stuff like that, but their term is also getting shorter, so they have 1 year left, and they're going to be busy with election. So I believe they will not do that much damage anymore. The bigger damage that was done was defunding. We have analysis where since this last government and the past 2 years, there have been 14 to 15 million euros defunding of the civil society sector in Slovakia, which is massive amount of money, and it led very many organizations to the brink of extinction. Of course, even we had to release a few people from the staff. So this is really hitting us hard, but I still believe we are very resilient, and maybe in the second part of the discussion we will still talk about the resiliency, because there is lots of things we are doing and done, I think, very well that we can talk about later.
Thank you. Really interesting to hear the extent to which being in the EU has shielded, but the extent to which it has not as well, and what you've done. And yes, we will turn to resilience. We will steal from the next panel. Sorry. Now let me turn to Michael Hall, who is an independent researcher now, focusing on human rights, democracy, and civil society. But he has worked considerably across Eurasia, worked for everyone. I'm not going to name them all. He's going to, we had discussed previously Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, but maybe he'll go wider than that. Michael.
Yeah, I might try something a little more ambitious, if you'll bear with me. So thank you very much, Janet. And John, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. That was absolutely brilliant. And so much of what you said resonated with me, and what I've seen, so we need to talk. Okay, so, it's interesting. I came here actually intending to speak about the US as an example of clamping down on civil society. But I think we've heard quite enough about the US. Thank you very much. No, but seriously, George and Dustin, I think yesterday did a truly fantastic job of presenting both the challenges of the moment, but also some of the nuances that maybe make things not so bad. So so Janet suggested that I focus on Central Asia, and I'm very happy to do that for a couple of reasons. Central Asia has really been at the heart of my professional, academic, and also my personal life, full disclosure. But I have to admit to feeling a little bit of discomfort about speaking for the very simple reason that I'm not from Central Asia, right? So, you know, I have spent a considerable amount of time there, working there, living there, studying there. But my perspective will inevitably be that of an outsider. So, so I can't, nor should I, claim to speak for Central Asia, for civil society in Central Asia. But just to do want to share with you what some of the things that I notice, that I've noticed. And so now that I've told you exactly why you shouldn't believe a word I have to say, let me say a few words. One more thing also I do want to preface my comments with. I'm happy to stay away from resilience. I'm perfectly happy to talk about the problems. Simply because you know that is the name of this panel, right? We are talking about clamping down, and by definition, clamping down means we're talking about the regimes in the region. So, if my comments focus on regimes, it's not to take anything away from civil society. It's not to take anything away from the agency and the courage and the resourcefulness and the resilience of the activists in the region. Again, just in keeping with the spirit and the topic of the panel, I will be focusing on regimes. So what can we say about the regimes? Well, quite a bit, and I'll try to keep myself try to keep things as brief as possible. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this this morning about how to frame the issue, and it's certainly things are bad, without question. The regimes are cracking down. The space for civil society is shrinking in many aspects, and civil society organizations and activists are facing challenges of a scale, in many instances, that has not been seen in the region for quite some time. But I would submit that it's not entirely black. It's not entirely unambiguously bad. I was using the word earlier, I was talking to Janet, dynamically bad. And what I mean by that is, we've spoken a lot over the last day about how unpredictable things are and how so many of our assumptions about the way things work have been upended just within the last year, but you know, even before that. And I think it's not only for civil society that things have become unpredictable and chaotic, but it's also the case for regimes that things have become unpredictable. And this conditions in many ways and informs the way that they approach civil society, both in terms of cracking down, but also, I think in some ways, it limits what they are able to do or what they're willing to do. In short, I think they are just as confused as all of us are. Just as much as they might try to project an aura of invincibility and being all-powerful, I think they're also not immune to the changes and to the uncertainties that are plaguing the region. So, as I say, that carries with it its own dangers, but also perhaps does impose some limitations. So I think there are two ways in which this manifests itself. One is in domestic politics, and one is in the very radically changing geopolitics of the region. I think for my comments, I want to focus a little bit on the domestic politics, and I'll get to that in a sec. We've touched on the geopolitics a bit, the sort of the withdrawal of the U.S., the impacts of the war in Ukraine, the rise of China, all of which I'd like to touch on, but maybe I'll leave that perhaps for the discussion. But what I want to say that about the regimes is that I think in all 5 countries of Central Asia, yes, including Turkmenistan, we are looking at regimes that are at various stages of consolidation or transition in a very, very fraught and unpredictable geopolitical environment. So what do I mean by that? Okay, let's take perhaps what is one of the more repressive regimes in the region, Tajikistan. And it may seem strange to talk about Tajikistan as a regime that is consolidating when you think about the fact that there is a president, Emomali Rahmon, who has been in power since 1992. I would submit the story of Tajikistan for the last 30 years has actually been one of consolidation, that this is a process that began in the Civil War when a new, untested, relatively unknown figure was installed by a group of warlords, and then over the next several decades has gradually marginalized, sidelined, first the warlords who brought him in, then the political opposition, and now in the last 2 years has also imposed control over parts of the country that were outside the effective control of the capital. I'm talking about the province of Badakhshan in the east of the country, which was very severely repressed in a series of security operations a couple of years ago. So what does this mean? Well, obviously, this process of consolidation, each sort of iteration has brought with it massive repercussions against certain aspects of civil society, most recently targeting activists from the Badakhshani community. And then more recently than that, we've seen the mass arrest of basically any remnants of the political opposition. Why is this happening? Well, because just as the regime, and I think one of the reasons the regime is so eager to consolidate its power is that it's facing a very likely political transition in the coming years, where the president looks like he is intending to hand things off to his son, eventually. But before that can happen, his son, who is also new and untested and quite young, the field needs to be clear. There needs to be no possible challenge left. And this we see manifested in a marked uptick against civil society. So in Kyrgyzstan, in many ways a rather distressing story. This was a country that was held up for a long time as a model as a model environment for civil society, right? It was a very vibrant, very diverse civil society sector. But at the same time, it's one where we're seeing in recent years a new effort to consolidate power, first around two individuals, but now around one person, the current president, who has moved against his close political ally in recent days and weeks in an effort to create a system where he is the undisputed ruler of the country, which a year ago perhaps could have been contested. Now, Kyrgyzstan has had a series of such handovers of power, but I think in this case we're looking at a ruler who seems quite determined to build a personalistic authoritarian regime, which has not been a terribly successful endeavor in the past in Kyrgyzstan. And this has, again, brought with it efforts to suppress civil society in the form of legislation, a foreign agents law, or it's called a foreign representatives law, but de facto, the arrest of journalists investigating grand corruption. All of this, again, in an effort to strengthen an individual. Yep. But I think there are also very real limitations on this, on the current president's ability and capacity to fully suppress society. So, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I think in some ways it's worth speaking about these two together. These are two countries that have, in the past, I think, vied for the position of regional leader. I think Kazakhstan arguably has done a better job at that, but one where the regimes now are taking a very ambivalent approach to civil society, right? The current president of Uzbekistan came in with promises of reform, but has been very, very cautious and has been very progressive in some ways, opening up for business, for investment, and so on, but has been extremely cautious in his approach to civil society. I could talk a little bit more about that if people are interested, and has also been shown himself to be willing to use force when he feels threatened. So the demonstrations in the Karakalpakstan region a couple of years ago. Kazakhstan also, a new president who came in as part of what was meant to be a managed transition of power, which turned, again, a couple of years ago, a lot happened a couple of years ago, it seems, which was marked by protests, a violent crackdown, and is now, I think, trying to navigate between his desires to create a country that is different, that stands out, that is recognized as a middle power, at the very least in the region, but at the same time, I think has certain instincts that make him hesitant and reluctant to engage with civil society. So again, this creates kind of an ambiguous situation where there's at least a stated openness to dealing with to engaging, at the same time, a very strong desire to hold on to power. So what am I getting at with all of this? That these regimes, well, I'll leave aside Turkmenistan. These regimes are all trying to both hold on to power and strengthen their power, but at the same time are facing the very real limitations of their authority both conditioned by external and internal factors. And just wrapping up, I promise. Regarding the external factors, I think we've spoken about the U.S. I think it is important to note the impact of the war on Ukraine and the increasing isolation of Russia. This also has implications for Russia's ability to exert influence in Central Asia and the ways in which the Central Asian regimes relate to Russia. There's been a clear trend towards trying to seek new partners, both in trade but also in politics. Not that anyone is looking to cut ties with Russia completely, but I think to varying degrees, there are openings there. And then, of course, the rise of China as a major trading partner, but also an increasing presence in security, also with very potentially profound implications for civil society. So, yeah, in sum, as I said at the outset, a very unpredictable, a very dynamic environment where in many ways, the sort of the newly emerging orders are not always conducive to civil society. I think if we're looking at an international or a geopolitical situation where very pragmatic, very transactional, and very personal relations will probably take the fore, that's not terribly promising when it comes to support for human rights and civil society. But, again, these uncertainties can also create both limitations for regimes and new opportunities. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much. A lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall there, and a lot of different things, and a lot of stands to go through. But really interesting to get that perspective. I'm now going to turn to our final panelist, Jonathan Cohen, Executive Director of Conciliation Services. He also has a dazzling array of potential places that he will draw his experience from. I've written down South Caucasus, but I could mention a lot of others. So over to you, Jonathan, and you present from where you wish.
Thanks so much, Janet. Yeah, I think the mic's working. And to start with, I'll as kind of rider that's similar to Michael's, as someone who's worked with colleagues from the South Caucasus for 35 years now almost, and in the South Caucasus, but very much as an outsider, but hopefully an empathetic friend, perhaps people would say a critical friend at times as well. And I want to reflect a little bit on the situation in the South Caucasus and then do it from the perspective of the clamping down on civil society, but I think Jana gave a tremendous and eloquent insight into the Georgian case. I won't go into the nuance of it, but I want to think of it from the angle of someone who's been involved in peace building and conflict resolution initiatives, because conflict has been one of the overarching experiences of the region, and it was very useful for Jana to put the history of violence in a wider perspective and a broader perspective, because I think it has an impact on where we're at today. I mean, to start with, perhaps just to make a slightly perhaps obvious point, but I think governments in the South Caucasus, but governments in general, tend to be very good at learning from one another when it comes to clamping down on civil society, be it through legislative means, be it through administrative practices, be it through more brutal tendencies. And that kind of behavior inevitably makes it very difficult for civic actors to hold the space and to survive, and yet we see some tremendous examples of how they've done that. We might come on to resilience later. I'm actually a little bit of a skeptic about the word resilience, because I think resilience is often an excuse for a lack of strategy from outsiders. They expect resilience of people who endure terrible situations, but they don't necessarily give the sort of support to mean that that resilience is not prioritized as the main approach. In the South Caucasus, for a long time, we've observed a situation in which I think we could say that Azerbaijan was the alpha male in terms of clamping down on civil society. We now see Georgia grappling for the top perch in the situation, and I think it leaves us with, as Jana said, a very clear picture of a dramatic squeezing of civil society in Georgia. And I won't go into more than Jana's already said about the way in which civil society there is under attack. I will look at one particular small part of the equation, which is Abkhazia. And And I think it's important to look at Abkhazia and to look at civil society in Abkhazia because it reminds us that situations don't always conform to neat and straightforward patterns. In Abkhazia, and I won't go into the broader contextual issues, which would take ever such a long time, but we see a paper-thin and fragile civil society. It's one that operates in a society that has been through 35 years now of war and post-war lack of resolution, shall we say. And it's also a civil society that's very much interwoven with a particular Caucasian familial social environment. And so relationships in a very small environment can trump the civic dimension in many ways. But I think what's tended to happen is that the Abkhazia is often portrayed from outside as a tool of Russian action against Georgia. It's often looked at purely through the lens of Russian occupation. And I think this fails to take into account the efforts of civic actors in Abkhazia to influence societal and political development there. A couple of interesting examples. In Abkhazia, there have been a number of efforts to bring in foreign agents legislation, and Abkhaz civil society has resisted and prevented such legislation from being brought in. There have been efforts to shut NGOs down through very invasive tax inspections, through other legislative means, and Abkhaz civic actors have actually taken tax inspections to court and had them thrown out. So in a kind of Alice through the looking glass type of world where legal system can work legally sometimes and an awful lot of the time doesn't work legally, civic actors have found ways to navigate the system to survive. But they've resisted in a very difficult environment and one in which they've struggled to continue to try and hold government to account. It would be hard to say they've been successful in the round, but survival is sometimes success in environments like this. And they've played, I think, quite an important role in keeping different strands of conversation alive. None of that's to say that the influence of Russia is not pervasive and is not pervasive to this extent that we currently see a situation in which senior Abkhaz civic actors are very cautious about leaving Abkhazia to take part in civic initiatives outside Abkhazia because they fear that they won't be allowed back into Abkhazia. So it's a paradoxical situation in which there is tremendous agency and there are tremendous restrictions on the agency of those individuals. I think it also highlights a trend or an issue that I suspect is common throughout the former Soviet region, which is a generational one in regard to civic actors who came of age through the resistance to the Soviet regime, through the early euphoric periods of independence for the post-Soviet states. This is a generation reaching the late 50s, 60s, 70s. Many of them are burnt out. They have given their lives to creating societies that they now observe have gone in a very different direction from that which they aspired to. And this, I think, ties in with a lot of the issues that I know Robert has long considered around mental health. The ways in which people have provided support to sustain this kind of work is a real challenge. From our perspective as a peacebuilding organization, we've been doing more and more work on mental health and in the terms of how people who are working on mediation, on peacebuilding, don't have adequate support and mechanisms to address the mental health challenges they face from working in conflict environments. We're doing it from a starting point, looking at our own team, our own staff, but we're also very mindful of contexts where we work, and I'll give you a very different example, Central African Republic, where there is the most minimal mental health or psychosocial support, and yet a society that's been traumatized by decades of war. How do you start to address trauma? And if you don't address trauma, and I think this is very eloquently displayed by Janet, if you don't address trauma, how do you move on to issues such as reconciliation? And I think this is something that we observe very much in the context. So then what does it say for peace building in situation like in conflict resolution? Well, if we go back 30 years, I think the aspiration or the assumption was that civil society was going to be a dramatic driver of transformation and of social change and of attempts to resolve conflict, inspired by what had been seen from solidarity through to people's power in the Philippines, through to anti-apartheid movements. When I became involved in this field in the early 90s, there was a sense that civic actors had a very significant contribution to make to conflict resolution processes. On some levels, I think an enormous amount has been achieved, and I look at the contributions that were made in Northern Ireland to peace in the Philippines, to peace in Colombia, and the actual attainment of peace agreements after generational conflict, where civic actors helped to construct what peace agreements and what implementation processes would look like. So there have been tremendous achievements. At the same time, I think we need to be realistic about the limitations of transformation that have come through this. And some of that, and it's down to a range of different things. I mean, I look at the South Caucasus and one often hears the critique, well, what have you achieved? And then I think, well, goodness me, look at the resources that were invested in civil society, look at the resources that have been invested in militarization, in the sorts of issues that Jana was pointing out in Georgia. If it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable to recognize the disparity. And yet, I think civic actors in the South Caucasus have kept alive relationships between groups that would not have had relationships, both across conflict divides, and I think Jana herself is an exceptional example of someone who's sustained relationships with people in Abkhazia through thick and thin, but also within their own societies, civic actors within Abkhazia, within Georgia, within Azerbaijan, within Armenia, keep conversations alive between people who are not natural allies, not naturally disposed to cooperate with one another. And I think that's a really critical contribution that can be made. I think that civic involvement in peace processes more generally brings fresh ideas and perspectives that are really critical. I think there's a very challenging question, and I'd love to have a deeper conversation with you about this, Jana, in terms of the who is to blame. Because I think there's a very strong tendency in the South Caucasus to constantly question who is to blame for the predicaments we have, who is to blame for the fact that we haven't solved conflicts. And very often it's about blaming the other, blaming the outsiders, and not having a rigorous and critical assessment of one's own contribution. Very simplistically, in the Georgian context, there's a very rich tradition of blaming Russia, and for very good reason. But at the same time, there is not such a self-critical analysis of Georgia's behavior in relationship to the conflicts it's experienced in the last generation. And so I think if the inability to grapple with that, even among many civic actors, is a factor that contributes to sustaining the conflicts. I'll end there because I know Janet's leaning forward in an impatient way, and I'll see if I can sneak some of my other points in the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it, Jonathan. I just wanted to kick off first by asking, because I think this is important considering what both Jonathan and Michael have raised from their particular perspectives. I wanted to turn back to Berit and to Lukasz. There's this this sense that I am getting of quite often a copy-paste approach to how to oppress civil society. I mean, that approaches are tried again and again. They're picked up from place to place, and then sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. I'm wondering from both of your perspectives, do you see ways that civil society are successfully countering these? Are these the kind of threats that civil society can deal with, or do you think that that's just the way that they consistently have the same playbook being used, the dictator's playbook, authoritarian's playbook, let's say?
Yeah, if you're asking what the civil society itself does about it, is that your question? Yeah. Yeah, because it's absolutely right. There is a playbook. There legislation is similar to each other, methodology. But apart from a few interventions with legislation, this methodology is hundreds of years old. So there are very, very few new inventions of repression. And how does civil society survive? They transform, they adapt. They never disappear. So, I mean, I think when you look at the most repressive states of the region that we are looking at now, they have shown an amazing ability to adapt, to see how what can they work with. For instance, in Russia, there is now a prevalent fear not only in the civil society but also in society altogether. So it's everything is becoming depoliticized. They're in survival mode, but they retain small, safe networks. They use art and culture instead of the pure, strong political agenda. They transform and use and develop technology that is helping them. And for the time being, for a lot of these civil society activists, the goal is not anymore transformation as such. I mean, societal transformation. It is survival and the ability to still be talking to society wherever it is possible. They're becoming more self-sustainable financially. For instance, we see a lot of efforts of organizing events where they pay, they sell merch, they provide services, they crowdfund when it's possible. And of course, a lot of civil society is becoming less professional. They have ordinary jobs, and civil society activism is becoming more of a hobby. I mean, this is not linear. I mean, some places it's not happening, but other it is happening. Yeah, and that's the way. I think adaptation is the sort of the overall answer to your question.
Civil society is actually becoming more professional, at least in my experience, because we are also better and quicker and faster to adapt and learn from each other even. And this is happening a lot because, as we said, the laws are copy-paste. They're not really putting lots of effort into it. So we are sometimes ready. We know what's coming. And for example, nowadays in Czech Republic, they have also a new government that is trying to do the very same things. And, we are helping our Czech counterparts through, and it's easy, today you connect online, you have seminars, you talk, and it's very quick. The transition of the knowledge, of the experience and what to do is very fast. So we also learn and adapt, and I believe we are very, very good at it. When it comes to Czech Republic, we are usually better and ahead of time with the bad things in Slovakia. So we are 2 years ahead of them, and they know, they've seen it, they've seen the scenarios, and I think they're better prepared than we were. They're more advanced because they already have amazing materials put together, narrative playbooks, how to counter the narratives, not even counter, how to grasp the narratives in their own hands, how to not stay in their frame, in the government frame. And I believe they will handle it even better than us.
Well, just to emphasize, when I said professional, I didn't mean less good. I meant not necessarily having it as a full-time profession.
Having different streams of income to sustain themselves. Talking about the autocrats playbook, I know this is one of the lines but I wanted to put it to you. You mentioned the collapse in Western funding, Barrett, and not only USAID, but other governments as well. Has this, in fact, just shown, as the autocrats would argue, that the roots of civil society in many societies were never very strong, and they were essentially foreign implants? They were planted by Michael when he went and did his chief of party in different places, and they weren't. They're not really local enough to survive. Reactions? Yep.
Yes, yeah, that argument also is part of the authoritarian playbook, but also there is some truth to it. One of the first reports I was part of writing for the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and that was in 2003, was on Belarus, civil society in Belarus, and it talked about how they were not communicating with society, so it was called operating in a democratic ghetto. And I think that to a certain extent has prevailed all the way up through today. Don't you agree? Yes, but I think, I mean, we have to be honest about that. The ability to reach out to society as such has been limited. I think when people talk about democracy in the 90s and a large part of society embraced the idea of democracy, they were not thinking about the democracy, I mean, the large part of the society, they were actually talking about economical progress. And I think democracy was, a
byproduct.
It was a necessity for economic. So when economical progress didn't come to their private economy, they blamed democracy, not the economical systems. But for the income, very, very briefly, I think the question is unfair. How can a society that has no tradition of civil society, no traditional charities, as in UK is a very big thing, have income for something that is so unpopular? So I think we have to be honest and just say, okay, it can't exist without funding. I think we have to be honest about that.
Yeah, just since you mentioned me, I think, and this is actually a
pointing directly at you, Michael.
You know,
you're the foreign agent.
It's all my fault. Yeah. So then this is also a point that I had to skip over, but yes, you know, I think it's safe to say there is a certain element of truth to that criticism, and it's something that I think donors, and I can speak as someone who used to work for various donors, we were aware of. You know, we saw the problem happen, we saw the dependency, and we recognized it as a vulnerability. We also recognized that it exposed our partners to accusations of being foreign agents, of being, you know, Trojan horses for all kinds of, you know, crazy ideas that were undermining traditional value. Yeah, you know how the song goes. But you know, again, I think in a particular context that was perhaps inevitable. Now, did we do enough to prepare ourselves and our partners for the possibility that this could all suddenly one day come to an end? I think no, and I think because there was a certain failure of imagination, right? And you know, when, for example, you know, Open Society Foundations made some radical changes in how it decided to approach its work in the world, and national foundations across the region, which had been set up in the 90s, were shut down, spun off. You know, this also had a tremendously, this was a great blow to local civil society, again, in terms of their sustainability, their financial sustainability. So, and it wasn't just organizations in the region in Central Asia, for example, if you look at organizations in DC, such as Freedom House, such as IREX, such as NDI, IRI, et cetera, when USAID suddenly disappeared, again, these were organizations that in many cases were massively dependent on US government funding. And I think many of us sort of had this idea in the back of our minds, yeah, we should maybe diversify a little bit. But again, who knew? Right.
Well, there's no more money left in the world, so I don't know where you're meant to diversify to.
No,
Okay.
I actually disagree with that. I mean, the problem I face, I sit in an office in central London, and I look at a city that is flooded with money, and I think, how the hell do we get different people to fund what we do?
Absolutely.
There is a lot of money
Absolutely.
there. And you're absolutely right. The dependency on government funding is painful in the wider sector, but we've not yet found the narratives that will get philanthropists 100%, to fund what we do. I mean, in terms of peace building, it's proven that philanthropists just avoid peace building because they haven't got it yet, and that's about how we communicate. But just coming back to this strain of conversation about the external funding and civic activism, I think that the challenge is, and you spoke a bit about professionalization, I think it's amazing to see the professionalization, and at the same time, professionalization has squeezed out a bit of activism.
Yes.
And I find it very interesting when I look at Georgia, for instance, you see demonstrations that pull in tens of thousands of people who are dissatisfied with the structure of the political community. And so people can be mobilized, but it's very hard to then sustain that mobilization in an organized way. And if we think back to the 80s in the Eastern Europe and what was then the Soviet bloc, the people who were the kernel for dissent within the system, who made a very important contribution to the demise of the system, were not funded in a structural way by Western governments or foundations. They resourced themselves intellectually, emotionally, financially. And so we need to learn, how do you keep that transformative behavior at the heart of civic engagement? And civic engagement is far broader than NGOs. We often succumb to an NGOization of what civic behavior is. But actually civic behavior is a broad spectrum of non-state, non-government endeavor to make societies better.
I know you want to come in first, Lukasz, then back to Michael.
No worries.
No?
Lukasz.
I was just agreeing with what Jonathan was saying.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, I agree. I also agree. I think there's a strong preference among donors to work with organizations that were organizations, that had certain structures, that had boards, that had executive directors and could handle, do all the paperwork and all the accountability that was required. And again, this is not to denigrate these organizations in any way. The work they did was amazing, but civil society is indeed much more than that. And if you look back at Central Asia, there are activists who have adapted to this and have taken on approaches that do not rely on formal organizations, that do not rely on hierarchical structures, and indeed do not rely on foreign funding. So if anyone's interested, there's an excellent book called Kazakh Spring by Diana Kudaibergen, who's at University College of London, which looks exactly that, at how a network of activists in Kazakhstan was able to achieve a great deal in terms of social mobilization without forming formal organizations, which made them a lot harder to crack down on and shut down, and without relying on foreign funding. So there are other models out there that I think, Western donors quite often, again, we knew they were there, but we weren't really quite sure how to engage, or indeed if somehow that by becoming associated with us, they'd also then become potentially tainted. So yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, just a short comment on that, but because I think we have to be aware that we shouldn't fall in the pit where we think, oh, no, we can have a new model where everything is just activism and unorganized and unfinanced. We need both. And I think one is a precondition for the other. So we have to, these are not opposites, it's working together.
Before we go any further, I wanted to see if we've got some comments from the audience. We're going to finish at 11:20, so yeah, please keep your comments reasonably brief. Please, Craig.
Great. Craig Oliphant from the Foreign Policy Centre in UK. Thank you to all of the panel. Very, very rich insights. Couple of questions, if I may. And I suppose first one primarily to Jonathan, but anyone else who wants to pick it up. Linking, I suppose, the local in all of this and the geopolitics. I wondered if you could comment, Jonathan, on the extent, 25 years plus, 30 years working in the South Caucasus, the extent to which the war on Ukraine sort of has complicated, compounded any of the worthy local efforts that were being done at the civil society level in a context like Georgia, Abkhazia. And I suppose sort of tied to that, a positive in that we're seeing some form of resolution very slowly and incrementally happening on the Nagorno-Karabakh context, but it's come through the use of military force. You mentioned differentiation and copycat. Yes, the countries in the South Caucasus are more differentiated than anything, but there are copycat elements. And I just wondered what complications stem from a conflict being resolved through military force primarily, and what others sort of learn from that. The second one really is about the funding situation and what Berit and others have referred to. I suppose when you're looking at the pan-European context, there's similarity of raiding hard security or raiding soft security pots, soft power pots for hard security kind of exigencies and expediencies at the moment. I'm noting in the UK quite a pushback going on. Not least, we recently had 4 former chiefs of the defence staff pushing back at the government to say that it's not an either or. When you look at security, it's a both and that you lose an incredible amount if you are raiding Peter to pay Paul from the soft security. And I just wondered if you're noticing a similar debate in the Nordic countries and elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We'll take this one here from Jana.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and rich discussion. Jonathan, as you challenged me, I would like to comment. So I would avoid questions like who are to blame for what is going on, because this is not right question to ask. And we know to find right answers, we need to formulate right questions. And right questions could not be whom to blame, because logically we are going to punishment, not problem solving with this question. That's the logic, that's the consistency. If we would ask question how the problems are created, how question is the right question in this context. Another thing I would say is that we are discussing authoritarian playbook, or let's say guidelines. What about actually calling things their own names? For example, if we will consider Russian occupation playbook or guidebook, that's about Abkhazia, South Ossetia, independent in quotation states. That's about Donetsk, Lugansk, and Karabakh. And Armenia was a hostage of Karabakh for years. And as soon as Armenia actually is released now for being hostage of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, they started blooming in development. So I would say that perhaps we need to say that Abkhazia is Russian-occupied, actually, region of Georgia, yeah? And what is, of course, all these constituencies are very different, because in Abkhazia is very well-developed civil society. It is not case in Donetsk and Lugansk. It make a huge difference. But still, we need to watch probably things in a wider context. Thank you.
And understand that you wish to, I'm allowed to go to 11:20 or?
No, just
Okay.
a very small remark, because I agree with Berit with the fact that you need both, and actually both existed. Because yes, the dissident movement was maybe not very organized, the Charter 77 was not very organized, but we on the outside were very well organized, supporting them to be able to do what they were doing. And don't forget that the dissident movement had the Solzhenitsyn Fund, which was providing the financial support for families to sustain themselves while their family members were in prison. So both actually existed.
Great, thank you. And question right back from Anna.
Thank you. I really loved what you said, Berit. So I also would like to come back to this, and I have a question. Because I think when we talk about this decreasing funding environment, we talk a lot about the survival of organizations, human rights organizations, right, civil society organizations. So I'm very curious to know about your experience of people who left and found another kind of job to sustain themselves, but to continue to advocate for human rights and democracy. What helps to convince people that this is a very good way of doing civic activism, to stay in this, even if you cannot make a human rights career, as what we've been seeing these last 30 years? Thanks.
Thank you. Nice range of questions there. I'm going to add my final question to the mix for you, so pick and choose. It's a pick and mix situation. My final question is kind of quite general, but do you feel that civil society in the areas that you're speaking about, the geographical areas, recognize the dangers of autocracy too late? Do you think they reacted too slowly? Do you think that civil society is now just saying, let's just wait it out, there's going to be a pendulum, it's going to swing, or have they now recognized the reality? So, and from the floor we have is there now a pushback on funding also being needed for soft as well as for hard security aims? Should we be calling occupation, for example, by its name from Jana and actually sort of stop pussyfooting around? Comment from Robert about the past, that there was also this relationship between organized and activists, and how do you convince people to find ways to stay in the field, that it is possible to combine with different things? And my question as well. I'm going to go from Lukasz and then finish with Berit. So Lukasz, you first.
Thank you. I'll pick on your question because I can speak for ourselves. I do think we do recognize the dangers. We are, I believe, not late to respond, but who is the judge of it? What is fast and what is not? We are doing our best, I would say. We have formed, in Slovakia, we have formed a platform for democracy very quickly, that is largely supported by Civitates from outside, but also a couple of foundations from within the country have donated some money into it, so it's functional, including my organization. We are at the forefront of it. One of my colleagues is in the call it presidency of the platform. We do facilitate the meetings as well. And there's around 88 organizations at the moment. And one thing that I really noticed, which is really good, and I believe it's important to mention in this context, is that there is a tremendous solidarity among the organizations that otherwise would be fighting about lots of small nitty-gritty things. Yeah, we often, in democracy, this is good. We focus on those 10% of things that we disagree, and we fight about them, and we have disagreements, and we're strong about it. And I think that's perfect in democracy, right? Because we need to advance somehow. We like that type of conflict. But nowadays, we realize that if we want to keep that, we need to abandon that fight for a while, because if we focus on those 10% and not on those 90% that connect us, that we have in common, we will lose the ability to be able to fight about these 10%. So this is happening within the Slovak civil society, tremendous solidarity between liberal and conservative organizations and all kinds of left, right, whatever. We are trying. We are not at the best at it, but we are, I believe, on the good path and responding the way we can. We recognize the danger and we are trying to do our best. That's it.
Jonathan.
Thanks, Janet. I'll start with Jana's points and then go to Craig, and then a small point on your question, if I may. So, Jana, maybe I didn't frame it right. I wish the question, who is to blame, wasn't the one that's asked, but it's the one that for decades I've heard asked in Georgia, because it's not just who is to blame, it's actually Russia is to blame. And I think the concern for me there is that it's been a desire to avoid a self-analysis of Georgia's own agency. And as a result, it's also contributed to a failure to explore the horizon of opportunities that are really there to transform relations with Abkhazia. And there have been many critical moments in the last 30 years where Georgia could have chosen a different path and not fallen into a trap laid by Russia, or not fallen into the playbook of Russia. And I contend that Georgia could have transformed the situation. The use of the word occupied I find interesting, because for me, and you know this and we've discussed this, our colleagues in Abkhazia do not feel occupied, they feel defended. And so I wouldn't doubt. I mean, I've been in Abkhazia at times when there have been very real threats to them from Georgia, when Georgian troops, as far as they've been concerned, have, as they've said, massed on the borders. And so you know, I said to you this morning at breakfast, a very dear friend of ours said to me in 2008, when Abkhazia was recognized, we've gained our independence and we've lost our freedom. So they're very aware of the delicacy of their predicament. But the fundamental dilemma for Georgia has always been the failure to recognize that faced with bad choices, Abkhazia chose a bad choice that the Georgians didn't like, because for them, Georgia was a worse choice. And that is around, did Georgia enable itself to be a better choice? And to this day, it's failed to do that, unfortunately, for the majority of the population in Abkhazia. Not all the population, because as we know, it's far from a straightforward demographic story. But I think, so these issues about self-analysis, critical assessment of your own position, and acknowledgement of what the other really wants and aspires to, and recognizing the legitimacy of an aspiration, even if you disagree with it, and even if you vehemently oppose it, in order to create a discourse between parties. And that's something that perhaps has just not prevailed. It then leads into the question of the consequence of the war, that Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war there, you know, going back, not just 22, but going back to 2014. I mean, what we've seen is that it feeds polarization, because it has fed into the perception of geopolitical camps as the overarching framework of the conflict. And so when, you know, when we talk about Russia's role, we need to recognize the West's role as well in the Georgian-Abkhaz conflict, and the way the West has all too often allowed it to become, to fall into the framework of a Russia versus the West, and again remove the agency. And it's been far too rare that we've seen creative strategies such as that which the EU came up with in 2005, learning from a lot of NGOs who were saying, you need to engage without making a decision on recognition. And the EU came up with an engagement without recognition strategy. It led to one of the most productive periods of potential in relations there. So I think we've seen the identification with sides as a result of the war in Ukraine. We see the fear of deals being made. People in Abkhazia feel that they are potentially going to be collateral in a Russia-West or Russia-Georgia deal around the context. So I think there are many layers to it. But I think as you then spoke about the military victory dynamic and Azerbaijan's military victory, you go back to Croatia's blitzkrieg that transformed the Balkan situation. And yes, I think there have been people in Georgia who did think, oh, maybe we could do the same. But I think, fortunately, more sober analysis in Georgia prevailed, that whilst Azerbaijan was in a position to militarily transform the situation, Georgia has not been in a position to militarily transform the situation in regard to Abkhazia. We saw what happened in South Ossetia in 2008 when Russian provocations over a period of time tempted Saakashvili to think he could change the dynamic by allowing a military scenario to prevail, and it had disastrous consequence at the time. So,
can I move you on a moment,
yeah,
Jonathan?
sorry.
I do apologise.
Yeah, no, please. I'll finish there. I was going to say something in your question, but I think I'll let others say more eloquently.
You can say a line in answer to my question. Yes or no?
No. I think I look at Georgia again, and this point that Jana pointed out, the tragedy of Georgia was when the civil society activists got into government, they were corrupted by power. And that was it's just such a tragedy to think of what Georgia could have achieved.
Okay, I'm going
had
to
that not been the case.
Stop that. I'm going to stop that there and say, by the way, Jana and Jonathan are co-moderating this afternoon session, the private session. So let's look forward to that.
Ooh, okay.
Right. Okay, Michael.
So in answer to your question, did civil society fail to appreciate the threat of authoritarianism? No, I'd say emphatically not. I mean, there were certain developments, of course, that I think no one really anticipated. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine being one. The rapid departure of the U.S. from the field of human rights and democracy support being another. But no, I think they were very clear-eyed about the threats. In terms of how people have responded, it's varied. There have been cases where people have left the field altogether and moved on to other things, or gone into exile and remained engaged from exile or not, as the case may be. There are organizations that have taken on what may be seen as less directly controversial issues, have gone into service provision, have gone into working with in areas that governments are more likely to perceive as being sort of soft, which again, I think they're quite wrong to perceive them that way, but that's the reality. So the response is varied, and in return, as far as the loss of funding goes, there are organizations and activists who will keep doing what they're doing regardless of whether there's funding or not. I mean, obviously, it gets a lot harder.
But in response to Craig's specific question, do you think that now funders are recognizing that hard security isn't the only solution?
Yeah, again, I think it's sort of gone back and forth. There have been times when the approaches of the region have been very heavily securitized, right? So particularly after 9/11, the war on terror, and so on. There have been times when other issues have been more prevalent. So it's always been this kind of interaction, and there are those who have been, I think, more open to the idea that there's actually very often no hard line between the two, that sort of the one can enhance and influence the other. That is, support for human rights and democracy can actually play a positive role in enhancing security overall. So it's been it's hard to give a straight answer to either of those questions. It depends.
Yes. Berit, I'm going to give you the final word. You have plenty of time, plenty of questions to work through. Anything that you felt that you didn't manage to say already, because you had lots of cards.
Okay.
Go for it. We're just waiting for our coffee, so the longer you take,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will do the questions I've chosen in order of appearance. I think the question about soft and hard security really important. And especially in our countries where we seem a bit unable to choose one or the other. As you said, I mean, we didn't have defense for a long time, and we know we have to rebuild it. Well, I'm from the Helsinki tradition, so I think they are deeply interconnected. We would be totally naive to not have hard security, because you need hard security to safeguard soft security. So, you ask very specifically if this is a discussion in Nordic countries, and there is to a certain extent. I think what is a problem is that, well, we see the funding for civil society is decreasing, so there is, you can't see exactly that, but also seen a little bit on the other side, because we have peace organizations, peace movements, that are also unable to see the need for hard security. So they're actually arguing that we should not give weapons to Ukraine, because then we would have peace. You know, we have serious people saying this. So that's the danger of also sort of leaning towards soft security. Okay, and the question about people choosing or basically part-time civic activism, that is by necessity, you know. It's not a choice, it's by necessity. So the other option is to stop civic engagement altogether. It's like Michael said, they do it whether they get funding or not, but they sort of try to cope without funding, and they need to eat and they need to pay rent, so they can continue in this, and it's less efficient. I mean, let's face it, but it works to some extent. And I think the question you ask is a massive one. It's not a yes or no, definitely a question. And I think we should move away from the four post-Soviet countries, because there they recognize it immediately, because they've been under authoritarian rule forever. So every slight move towards authoritarianism, they recognize it immediately and pinpoint it. Where we do not recognize this is in Western Europe, where we have safe democracy for a long time. And we really think that it will continue forever without fighting for it, which it doesn't. And there I can bring up my big tech slide, which finally.
Yeah,
so,
if we can say who's to blame.
Big tech. Well, no. But of course we have all benefited from big tech. I mean, it has, and I think especially in the beginning, because then the algorithms weren't geared up against us. The big tech were actually supportive of a democratic agenda. X very supportive of a democratic agenda in the very beginning, you know. So it's and Facebook was really efficient in this, but now we see a completely different picture. And I'm not the expert on this, but I've really started to pick up on this and the consequences. And for instance, Google and Apple comply with requests from Russia to take down sites, opinions, millions, and they do it in compliance with Russia, not with the democratic agenda. We have algorithms reinforcing propaganda and censorship. We have bots with providing fake news and populist and enhancing populist agenda. And I was at a lecture a short while ago, an AI expert showing by illustrations how AI accelerates. So when you have bots, when then sort of being already quite important, now the AI can accelerate that 1,000 times in a second, you know. So this is what we are up against, and we really need to understand what's going on. UK, there was a researcher coming from UK to Oslo last year. He said that up to 25% of British youth didn't think democracy is that important. Huh?
Yeah. On that note, I want to say thank you very much to my panel. Can you join me with a round of applause, please? We strayed a little over into the area of Janet Gunn's next panel. I apologize. I hope that we haven't strayed too far, but we will enjoy after the coffee. Robert.
Yeah, so I want to steal a few minutes of your time before coffee break. As you know, we are trying to raise funds for this book, Shady Places. And there are two things I want to show you. One is we are now working on the second book, which is for children whose parent has died at the front. And the thing is that the books that are being produced for children in Western Europe, in North America, in Australia, don't fit because they're for children living in a peaceful environment dealing with the loss of a parent. These kids are dealing with it at war. They every day hear the bomb alarm, they every day hear the shaheds, and so we need something different. So we've been discussing with the authors what would work, what kind of message would be possible to convey. And so the decision has been that the centerpiece of the second book will be the helmet. The helmet refers to military, the helmet refers to papa or mama at the front line. The helmet is something that protects. You can hide yourself under the helmet, and you can kick the helmet if you are angry. So this book is currently under development. Hopefully after the summer, we will be able to start printing it. Keep in mind, there are tens and tens of thousands of children who already lost a parent at the front line, right? A second thing is that if you look in Temny Kotochki, Shady Places, Shatike Pletchen, as it originally was called, you all the time see a kangaroo. And so now we're working on this kangaroo. And the kangaroo will also appear in the next book. This is the table of the drawer, and you see everywhere in the drawings there is this little kangaroo going around. And the kangaroo is a beautiful symbol of resilience because the kangaroo has a little pouch. And a kid can put a photo of the parent in the pouch or a message for the parent in the pouch, message for the parent that is at the front line, or a message for the parent that has died. So we're now looking at ways how to develop this kangaroo element, right? So if you want to support this, again, outside is the collection box. If you give more than €10, you can take a copy of the book. Second, what I want to show you, and that will be rotating during the coffee break. So the Sakharov Center has a big archive. It's much bigger, actually, than we know ourselves, and we are finding things. And one of the things that we found, I want to show you, is the drawings of a person who was living in Amsterdam. He was a friend of us, Frits Berend. He was a cartoonist, became quite famous. His cartoons appeared in the New York Times, the Le Monde, Frankfurter Allgemeine. And the guy was a Berliner. He and his parents fled from Germany when the Nazis came to power. He was a member of the Dutch resistance. He went to Yugoslavia in a youth brigade to help Tito build up socialism. And then he was kind of stupid. On the way back to the Netherlands, he went via East Germany. Forgot that Tito was fighting already with Stalin. And so he wound up in the prison, in the Stasi prison in Berlin for half a year. And this completely changed his mind, and his drawings are very nice. If you look at the drawings now, you just have to change a few wordings, and they fit exactly in this time. Thank you. We have a coffee break, and we'll be back in half an hour. The last part of the program of this morning, panel discussion with Janet Gunn, Janet 2, and the amazing thing, Janet 1 is one of the speakers, Janet Anderson, Karolis Kaupines, Gabi Grigaite Nagirde, and Maka Birulava. Can I ask you on stage?
So you sit here? That's all right. Great. Oh, I don't get one.
You do.
They will bring, Jeff. Okay. And you don't get one. You've had enough of the last panel, yeah? Good morning, everybody. Last but not least, our panel is unfortunately slightly shorter than the previous one, but we will do our best to have a good discussion and to involve our audience as much as possible. We've had some good points raised this morning in the earlier panel concerning civil society. And our focus will be on resilience, on how civil society sustains itself under pressure and under threat, both at a group level and at an individual level. It has struck me that there are many elements to resilience in this context, and I will mention a few of them and make a couple of observations on each of them. One is historical. It has struck me as interesting that Ukraine has a much more resilient civil society than Russia. Obviously, this also relates to the kind of pressure it does or does not come under. But there are historical elements to this. Russia had a system of serfdom which lasted until 1861. Ukraine had a much more variegated history in which its institutions were run by different systems, different regimes, including the Lithuanian-Polish Grand Duchy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which actually had quite strong institutions, rule of law, and civil society. And institutions, of course, are an important part of civil society, but also of civil society's protection. So education, the law, all manner of institutions, culture, media, freedom of speech, all of these are institutional, some of them funded by the state, some of them not. And I should also mention business, which I'll come back to that. Then there's societal resilience. This is the extent to which society is prepared to support civil society, or just to give up and shrug its shoulders and say, well, it is what it is. Government wants something different, okay. And then personal. To be active in civil society is a big personal commitment, and we've already heard mention of mental health and burnout, and it's very important. But last but not least is financial resilience. The panel before us talked a lot about the withdrawal of international funding. But maybe, particularly in countries that have only had market economies for a few decades, it might be possible to try to convince business that it has an interest in supporting civil society. Because you can look at Russia, where raiderism, as it's called, has stolen, the state has stolen businesses, and some of them enormously powerful, wealthy businesses, from private owners, and they have not been able to fight back. But if they supported civil society, the rule of law might be better protected, and they might be able to keep their money. So always appealing to somebody's pocket tends to be a good strategy. So we've got lots to talk about today, and our speakers come from different backgrounds, and we'll talk about different aspects of resilience and how to strengthen it. Our first speaker is Dr. Gabija Grigaite-Daugirte, I hope I pronounced that right,
yes.
Who is an international lawyer and currently assistant professor at the Faculty of Law at Vilnius University. And she has previously held senior government positions, including Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister of Justice. Over to you, Gabija.
Okay. So thank you, dear Janet, and good day to all of you. It's sometimes a big challenge to be in the last panel, but I hope we are all not going to disappoint you. So, so to start my remarks today, I would start saying by, authoritarian regimes, they destroy civil society not overnight. And they suffocate them slowly by, cutting funding, criminalizing extremism, exhausting activists, putting them, in prisons, and isolating civil society organizations from one another. So the crucial question is how societies, where it still, breathes, really can help keep the oxygen flowing elsewhere where we society is under threat. And of course, as in the critical situation for life of a human being, the best helper with oxygen is always the person near. And I believe that is the same with civil societies under threat. So that is why neighboring civil societies and governments must be the first responders to authoritarian regimes, democratic backsliding, and of course to all the negative consequences that these regimes create. And I talk here about, political support for the opposition, funding civil societies that are under threat, of course, humanitarian support, and legal initiatives also, because the further we move from an authoritarian country, the more difficult it is to have this issue high on the political agenda, and most importantly to act, because I believe that neighboring countries have the best sense of urgency, what is happening, and that is why I have the best possibility and the high expectation to act. So what neighboring countries and their civil societies can do? And I start by that first, they can help winning the time to save life of a civil society under threat, and of course slowing down the democratic backsliding. How? Using political means like sanctions, resolutions, because we have to keep the bad government occupied, Of course, then if we talk about EU, we can have financial means also, cutting the funding, but very important are legal means also. And I know that Janet will speak more about legal means, but overall, to have courage and political will to push back authoritarian regimes with legal initiatives is really, really important. The second thing is, of course, building trust with the civilian society under threat, as trust, is the fragile foundation of all relationships, I should say. So therefore, democratic countries have to earn trust from a civil society that is under threat. And that is not a very easy task, as, under authoritarian rule, civil society organizations, they very often act as vital reporters on human rights violations and compliance with international obligations. So they often frequently utilize international treaties and human rights conventions. So they might have certain mistrust, with the neighboring governments and feel risks, about undermining their independence and impartiality, of course. After gaining this trust, it is important to convince a civil society under threat to cooperate with the government. They trust, especially in the legal initiatives against the authoritarian government. And from my experience, I would say that this is not a very easy task to do, because one thing is creating trust on the political level. It is more difficult to ensure the same trust when we sort of narrow the situation down. And we have, civil activists approaching, different legal institutions or prosecution offices in these good countries. And very often we don't have the same trust, because usually and very often a prosecution office, by inborn, features, they mistrust. We have big mistrust in civil society organizations, in the data they have, in the evidence they provide, and, that is why it is of crucial importance to try to ensure that the same level of trust is between different layers within a state. And, of course, why trust is important, because a lot of international law solutions to challenge authoritarian regimes are better or even only equipped to be used by states. So that means, if we want to have effective, if we want to have legal action, we need a state that would have courage and political will sort of to expose, the human rights violations in different judicial international forums. But of course, in order international law solutions are used by state, we have to have a good democratic government that has courage, but most importantly, that has political will to challenge an authoritarian regime, because when you challenge, you have all the negative consequences. You know, you have hybrid attacks, you have pressure, you have a lot of propaganda, you have a lot of disinformation used against you, and this is the price that you pay. And that is, of course, there is definitely a role for a civil society in a good country to be, because they also can push for the political will to appear. And finally, you know, when we have one good government, this good government can create, you know, coalitions, because as Edmund Burke said in his thoughts on the cause of the present discontents, he said that when bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. So that is why it is important, if you find one good government, you have to make sure that good government pushes to have a good coalition. And I'm about to finish, Janet, don't worry that... that, you know, I think we have a very good testimony about what happens when good governments come together, because the way, you know, we all managed to come together against aggression, in relation to aggression against Ukraine is unprecedented. And, you know, all the legal developments that happened, there was only that we had coalition of a good government, we had a strong political will, we had courage to create legal precedents that were missing to afford, I would say, comprehensive justice for Ukraine. But finally, my concluding remark is based on the thought of a political theorist, Hannah Arendt, who believed that, you know, a retreat to private life is important on the one hand, but on the other hand, she warned that when citizens, and I dare to say good governments, also retreat into the private life to focus solely on their personal affairs, they create a very dangerous vacuum. And Arendt observed that when people become isolated and preoccupied only with the private economic status or personal lives, they lost the bonds of solidarity. And I would say that the same applies to good governments, wherefore, you know, democracies survive, they revive, they can be reborn, and civil societies under threat get fresh air that is so needed only when good people and democratic governments, especially neighboring authoritarian regimes, first assume responsibility, invest in the international law solutions, and very important, have courage and political will to use them and act firmly in defense of the shared values. Thank you. You see, and that's well done.
Thank you very much, Gabia. I'm intrigued by this, and I'd like to come back to you later about how the neighboring countries, the full might of the rest of the European Union countries, failed to stop Orban in Hungary and to some extent in Slovakia from developing authoritarian tendencies. But we can come back to that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Janet Anderson, who you know well already. She is a journalist when she's not being a moderator at Robert's conferences, focused on accountability and justice for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. She's president of the Association of Journalists at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm wearing very clearly my journalism hat for this panel, and without it becoming too much of a love-in, I just wanted to say, Gabia never said I all the way through this, but she should have said, I helped build trust with civil society. I helped civil society to cooperate. I had the courage and political will, I accepted, and my government accepted the consequences. So, she's okay. She's not playing the part that she was playing before, but she's the person who's made things happen on that level. For me, I am actually going to pick up Hungary as my example. My premise is that journalism are fundamental pillars to building resilient society. I think that goes without saying. But I just wanted to focus in on Hungary as the example of how investigative journalism has worked in some levels there to help change what has happened in society, but end with a warning for the dangers that also the media ecosystem faces now and in the future. The picture is in Hungary, since Orbán took power there, they built a very strong propaganda machine, state capture, including of the national broadcaster, started with a new media law, which they called a media constitution, and step by step they built up via taking over the public broadcasters and then through into the private media companies, business people friendly with the Orbán government bought the formerly independent outlets, either shut them down or transformed them also into government propaganda. So they built this whole media ecosystem, including almost all radio stations in the country, literally all the local newspapers, television channels, and even the state newswire. Apart from that, we had some independent journalists. I'm particularly quoting from one here who helped to found Direct 36, Andras Petho, and I don't know if I have said his name correctly, I've never met him. Their work before the last elections, including a big documentary that they produced about how the Orbán family business empire was created thanks to government and political connections. By its second day of publication, it had more than 1 million views on YouTube, and about a month ago, it had more than 4.2 million views in a country of 10 million people. I'm not saying that the media overthrew Orbán, but I am saying that. I'm saying that they're an integral part of how you can get change, and they're really important to building the resilience in all elements of civil society. So what are the issues that the media face? No different, I think, in some ways from the rest of civil society. Funding. External sources drying up, need for local support. How do you do that? The difficulty of framing from outside, being seen as being external and not actually part of society, and needing to be able to find different ways of reframing what they're doing to get support from local sources. The need to have collaborations across national boundaries. These, I think, are essential in order for the media to survive, and that may be a useful lesson more for some civil society to learn. Maybe they've already learned it and we're just copying them. I'm not too sure which way round it is, but these are tough to manage and you need experience, but they become part of your muscle memory, how to do joint investigations. Our biggest issue, which is reflecting back to Berit's point in the previous panel, is social media, big tech. We don't own the platforms. I just quoted this documentary. Where was it published? Probably on their own website, which is owned by WordPress, which is owned by whoever, but also on YouTube. That's how they got the reach. As we don't own the platforms, somebody else is often making money from our work, and somebody else is controlling the algorithm to say who gets to see or gets to hear or gets to read what we produce. So we need to find different ways of working within those social media ecosystems, but it is tough because we also need to counter them and we need to criticize them, and that becomes very, very difficult. Those are the points I wanted to make. Janet?
Thank you for your excellent timekeeping, Janet. We are now going to turn to Maka Berulava, who is research assistant at the Andrei Sakharov Center for Democratic Development Research, where she works primarily with archives. She holds a number of degrees in international politics, media and journalism, and Russian and post-Soviet politics, and she is an active volunteer with the Lithuanian Red Cross. And before she starts, I'm just going to lob her a point from what both our first speakers have said about support from neighboring countries and whether this can be considered in Georgia's case.
Well, thank you. I will start with the quote from George Orwell that the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of the history. Why I brought this, because I want in these 5 minutes today briefly mention the link of the culture and social media and TikTok for younger generation to the resilience and contemporary propaganda systems, and I think it touches upon both Professor Gabia's and Janet's points, because 2 days before this, on 20th, in Georgia, we had last ring, so when students graduate from high school. And I'm sure that many people in this auditorium, they've been to Tbilisi, and you know the building of the parliament, and next to the parliament is the, if not the most elite, one of the most elite schools in Georgia. I'm graduated from it, and I was raised, and we were raised, our generation, that we had a deep respect for education and deep anti-Russian sentiments. I graduated 10 years ago. And to my shock, I saw, so we have tradition that all the graduates wear white t-shirts and you draw on them some sort of image that you adore. It might be, I don't know, Che Guevara or whatever, doesn't matter. Someone draws some animation or something, and then you put wishes. And it was very, very sad surprise to me that I saw that my younger brother's classmate had, I think, again, people who studied Soviet politics knows the phenomenon of Vorzakonia, the criminal mafia elite institution, and they have this sort of logo of which very much reminds the star. And they had this on their t-shirt. This one thing, and yesterday I saw on Facebook, I think everyone knows that in Georgia, Facebook is one of the most widely used online platform. And there was some picture posted, some sort of media, when a girl, 18-year-old girl, has picture of Stalin on back of the thing. So I think these are details which very often are missed by politicians to draw attention to. Because if we will take social media, I will take Facebook for most widely used social platform in Georgia, and TikTok for Generation Z and Generation which comes after Alpha, or I'm not sure how it's called. So I think that contemporary propaganda systems very effectively can not only produce narratives that they want us to believe, but also very actively shape the topics of the public debate. I think that because we tend to stay in our own bubbles, and I catch myself it after the elections in Georgia, that 2024 parliamentary elections, I was always watching opposition channels which declared that they won. And I don't know, 10 minutes or hour after it, I realized that no, it might be wrong. So I think this fragmented reality is used against us. It's used against the resilience of civil society, because now, as I work with archives of dissidents very actively on daily basis, I'm checking their pictures, documents, or whatever. I understand that resilience is something that has to be practiced all the time. And as Professor Jana in the morning said, the traumas, the collective traumas which were not recognized and properly, I don't know how to process, really resonates to the situation which have we now in Georgia. And as Professor Gabia said, authoritarianism doesn't take over in one day. And I think from 2012, when some sort of intellectual groups already were noticing that our political system is not going towards to Europe, although it says it, they they, like not all of them, I'm not putting blame, but I'm putting blame on people who were sort of ignorant and ironically and sarcastically judging people who were believing in. I think that by end of the day, we all living in the country are going to elections, and elections is not as hopeless as it may seem, and Hungary's elections is perfect example for young people. We were sharing in Georgia this protest, these dancing politicians, and I also end by in a good matter that, oh, it's possible. Although Orban seemed very, very untouchable person, it appears that it's possible if civil society is there, if media works effectively, then you can decide things, right? Of course, I'm not saying that we are in same position, but I'm saying that to realize that you have to, as a politician, because we have quite sort of failed opposition flank in Georgia, because we fail to recognize things as they are, and we prefer to think that, oh, this is how it's going to happen. And at the one moment you have to realize that, oh, no, you have to have full picture. Because again, these things which happened, like we are independent for more than 30 years, but we have such a painful history of dealing with past. Because why I mentioned in the beginning these criminal sentiments, because on TikTok, when I was scrolling, I realized how engaging it is. So history becomes detached. So culture becomes detached, it becomes entertainment, and it is not fun at all. It is not fun that 17 and 18-year-old people are romanticizing 90s when we were having murdering, there was no trust to police. My grandfather's house was attacked by thieves, like it was a gang, and I still see this, like this, I don't know how to say, the bullet shots. So I think where I'm going to now, that if we want resilient society, we have to pay attention to every generation we have. And now at Sakharov Center, we are thinking on the concept of TikTok of our center, because we are thinking how to deliver what we have, and we have a lot of archives, a lot of information of dissidents' memory, which has to be delivered to youth. It must be entertainment, but it cannot be solely entertainment. Because without education, without awareness, and again, I think I will wrap it here. I want to say many things, but what I think that Georgian opposition and Georgian civil societies, and in this term I mean some sort of organizations, media organizations, fail to recognize that if you want to bring democracy, if you want to bring dialogue, if you want to build resilient society, it is not decided at conference halls. It is decided with people who don't have enough equipment to be not lost in information system which we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Maka. We keep hearing more about social media and big tech. I'm afraid one social medium I do not use is TikTok, but I gather from opinion surveys that Generation Z actually never read mainstream media at all. They get all their information from social media and are therefore the victims of algorithms over which our governments and our societies have no control. Now, I would like to introduce our final speaker, who is Karolis Kaupinis, who studied political science and later worked as a journalist at Lithuanian National Radio and Television, but more recently has mostly been working in the field of the arts as a freelance director initially. He creates films, museum exhibitions, and works for theatre and the stage. He was one of the members of the initiative group of the Lithuanian Culture Assembly, a protest movement that forced the Populist Party out of the Lithuanian Ministry of Culture last year. Yeah, over to you, Karolis.
Which is probably the only reason why I was invited into this circle, because I don't know most of the people here and didn't want to be an activist. It's just that at the end of last September, we reached a certain threshold where most of us thought we cannot go on like that. And as Gabia said, I was probably one of those people I didn't criticize as the one who retreats from political field. And a lot of us in the field of culture, I think, do that. We create our bubbles. And, you know, arts is a field where you can create a world instead of dealing with a real one. So in that field, you feel way more comfortable, especially when the society is slowly dissolving. But the first signal of that was probably last July, when a group of Lithuanian investigative journalists revealed a lot of facts about the prime minister of the time, the leader of the Social Democratic Party. And the party was not reacting to that. And a group of friends of mine, they organized a protest in the parliamentary square. And I was invited to give a speech because not a lot of people wanted to. So I didn't know what to say. And I used a comparison from a French film, La Haine, from 1995, where the character is falling, tells a story about a guy falling from the certain floor. And at each floor, he keeps on mentioning that jusqu'ici tout va bien, so far so good. And I thought that we are at the same point, and that was July. And then in September, the president, he kept on promising that this populist party, which I don't think is a party, I think it's a project of black political technologies, kept on being pasted in a lot of countries now. A lot of that has been mentioned. So the president said that he won't allow any of the ministers, any of the members of the party to be appointed as ministers in the government, but all of these red lines were trespassed. And then at the end of September, we found ourselves getting a minister of culture, a guy who, when he was presented at the presidential palace, was as shocking to the cultural community as the first missiles on Ukraine or the first coffins during the beginning of the COVID. I mean, I don't want to. These are, of course, minor details in comparison to a war, but that was a shock that somehow mobilized the community. We gathered into a non-governmental organization in an arts center in Vilnius. It was an assembly. 500 people who just came, and we thought we need to act. Therefore, we called ourselves an initiative group of a Lithuanian Cultural Assembly. And next day, some of the people were invited to the Prime Minister's office to discuss the matter. And she said that she asked us whether we want more money, and we said that it's not about money. And there was a big disagreement. It seemed that she couldn't just trespass the material level of it, that there was no other language she couldn't understand except taking money from there and putting it there, you know. And I think that the fact that we spoke more of a moralistic instead of a legalistic dictionary had an echo in a society, and we deliberately did so, not touching the social matters or the matters of welfare of artists and everything. But we had a very precise political goal to get this political party out of the Ministry of Culture. And the lesson why we did that was basically because a lot of us knew the Slovak scenario, where at the beginning with what's the surname of this lady, the Šimkovičova? Yes, when she was appointed, like a lot of artists reacted, attacking her more ad hominem instead of her as a member of. And it's easy to say that, you know, you are criticizing her because she's a woman or something. So we said we won't talk about the minister as a person. We will talk about the party. And then the politician said, "But that's a political requirement that you are forming here." And we said yes. So I think admitting to ourselves that we had a political goal, and it was a very precise political goal, helped to reach it in a sense, because then you were always neatly sticking to it. And that helped us as a cultural community to trespass those minor nitty-gritty things that usually are pretty vivid in I think, in the field of arts, you know, why she or he got that funding that I didn't get, et cetera, which is usually the 90% of the debate in a lot of cases. But this time, somehow, everyone managed to absolve from that. And by the end of November, we had the goal reached, and then it was changed by another goal to stop the amendments of the national broadcaster law, which is still ongoing, but I think it's going pretty well so far.
May I add one small thing? For those who do not live in Lithuania, imagine you're walking in the town. Maybe you're going to visit a museum, maybe you're just walking past a cafe, whatever, and you see everywhere a symbol, like a road symbol, like, you know, advice for stop, go, whatever, big red triangle. And you see inside it a river and the bank of a river, and then you see the word kultura going into the river. Such an effect, I mean, for anybody who has no idea politically what is going on in Lithuania, the effect of that symbol and being absolutely everywhere. Everywhere I go, every part of the country I've visited, it's in every institution. Kultura being thrown into, under the bus, as I would say in English, been thrown into the river. So my big congratulations on the symbol that you created.
That was not our invention. That's just a symbol that has been used by trade unions in the Avignon Festival in 2003. So we just borrowed it.
You borrowed it. You made it work for you.
It's a remake, you know.
If it works, it works. That's what's important.
Thanks,
well,
Janet.
Thank you all, and that, Karolis, your presentation is a reminder to all of us how potent a role culture can play. And if some of us older folk think back to Charter 77 and Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, as then was, culture can be a very, very important rallying point. And of course, it doesn't all depend on public broadcasters, which can come under attack. But again, it can be controlled by big tech, because a lot of people now don't go to the cinema, they watch film and things on streaming services like Netflix. So I think, again, Karolis, what you said is a reminder and a reflection of what others have said about creeping authoritarianism, how one has to be alert right from the beginning, because Lithuania is seen by everybody as a stable, strong democracy. But, you know, the first inklings appeared. And in other parts of Europe, where populist parties of the right and the left are now threatening the strength of the traditional position of more centrist parties, and where coalitions either have to be built, or in Britain, where we don't have normally a coalition building system, but it may come to it, because we now have not 2 but 5 parties rivaling each other. That one government minister who gets, you know, in the trade-offs in a coalition government, gets a position, can threaten democracy. And people need to be aware of this early on. Now, I've thrown in a few questions as we've gone along, but I would like our panelists to pick up each other's thoughts and see where that takes them in the discussion before we open to the floor, because we have actually half an hour, and I would like to involve others. How does one counter the capture of the media, for example, which is what Janet described in Hungary? How strong are electoral systems? Fortunately, in Hungary, it seemed to be strong enough for Orban's defeat to be sufficiently overwhelming for him not to challenge the result, which a lot of people thought might happen. So all these different branches of democracy play a key role. None of them on their own are sufficient. My question about the European Union, does it need to develop stronger tools to act when neighboring countries start slipping out of line in terms of democracy and so on? Any thoughts?
So I can start.
Do.
And I would start with the strength of election systems. You know, the example I use that while Moldova was, preparing for the elections, what they did, they literally banned, I think, like 6 or 7, I might be wrong in numbers, political parties that were indirectly being financed by Russia. And when they did that, they had opinion of the Venice Commission saying that it looks like being disproportional because maybe fine would be enough, and when Moldova said, yeah, but the fine would be paid by Russia and forgotten as soon as we do that. And my point is that democracies are still afraid to use democratic tools to defend democracy. And, lawyers, philosophers, they talk about this concept of militant democracy, meaning that sometimes you must restrict certain political, rights so that democracy itself is being defended. And I'm, because Karolis talked a lot about, what we are witnessing now in Lithuania, and I remember at that time when I worked as a Deputy Minister of Justice, Nemuno Aušra brought to register the political party, the one that is now in the coalition and the one that is, I would say, has the most threat, to the democratic well-being, because they talk about, closing constitutional court, for example, and all the other, So I remember, we were looking at all these documents, because we had to do, this checklist. And it was a fantastic documents to be. I mean, they were defending constitution. They were defending all the constitutional values. I mean, they even quoted all the constitutional provisions in the, establishing documents. And you sit there and you have this gut feeling that they will be nothing about it. But literally, you have no legal means to do something with that. And I think the point that I want to make is that we have to start thinking differently, because as Jonathan was saying in the last panel, bad governments, they learn from each other very sadly, but better than good governments learn from each other. And I think that is the biggest weakness that we have. We have to understand that, all these luxury and paradise times, they are far away. And we have to start defending our democracies by probably also not being that democratic. Sometimes, I'm sorry to say, but if sort of from the Venice Commission you get the conclusion that maybe fines would be better than banning the political party that is being financed by Russia with a lot of money to do the politics in the internet. So, I mean, sorry, but I would better choose banning than, and called, undemocratic or disproportionate, instead of then having to fight all the consequences afterwards when such party is in the ruling coalition.
It's a challenging thought, using undemocratic tools to preserve democracy, but I hope people will come in on this. But of course, you've raised the other issue, which we haven't raised yet, which is external financing of political parties and politics, not to mention the media and lots of other things that get external financing. And this is something that's come up in Britain just recently, with a right-wing party receiving massive funding from an oligarch based in Thailand. And so far, the law and the constitution, we do have a constitution, it's not written down, but we have one, have done nothing to deal with this. So that is another aspect where maybe national legislation needs to be considered more robustly. But happy to take any further comments about democracy.
I had a couple of, I wanted to pick up with Carolus to wonder whether you, I mean, I'm sure this is the critique that you've heard already. Is it sustainable, your movement? I mean, has it already lost steam? What does success look like in the end to you? And wondering with Maka's description of how social media presents this distorted view of history that you've experienced even yourself. I mean, what are you thinking about what to do about that? Are you on TikTok as Maka? Dancing? No?
I'm like a bot there.
Okay.
And I'm removing my account over and over when I get bored.
But Carolus?
Well, I think it depends how do you define what is sustainability in this point. In our case, I think it was effective because it had a clear goal instead of these big defined words of like defending civil society or something. Like most of us come from the field where it's a lot of DIY. Usually in the field of culture, there's always an underfinancing. You always need to do things yourself, but you are very goal-oriented, which means you achieve it